always, but
Yeah,
this time is going to be great because we've got a
this time's extra good.
extra good. We've got Gene Curry, who is an attorney at law, and he's going to talk about structuring the business, which is crucial to the formation of business in any event. You have to pay a lot of attention to it, and Gene's got the best information available for that. This show, Fox Robin's Business Show, is all about developing your best business ideas. And I'm a co-host, Bill Fox, and the other co-host is none other than the illustrious Coach Robbins.
Oh, just illustrious today. I really owe you.
Ubiquitous.
Ubiquitous, luminescence,
Luminescent.
all those wonderful adjectives, none of which are true.
And as I mentioned in the opening, we've got Gene Curry, who's attorney at law, and Gene, you're a general practitioner.
Well, mostly
not a narrow specialist. I mean, you can handle a wide variety of legal issues that come along, but you're particularly good at with small business.
That's right. Yes.
I mean, you understand a whole lot, but you happen to be very good with small business. And well, of course, you're in an environment here that has a lot of small businesses, so that all makes sense.
Yeah, we call it Cape Cod.
Right.
But the first thing we want to address, Gene, is we want to say that anyone who's starting a business, somebody who is already in business, also should consider or be well aware of limited liability entities.
Right.
With a quote firewall to protect assets, C-Corp, S-Corp, LLC, LLP. Could you let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure. One of the things to think about if you're an entrepreneur, and whether you're starting a business or in business, is to take advantage of the business structures that will allow you to put what I call a firewall between your personal assets and your business assets. Right. And it's a firewall in the sense that, and we'll talk a little bit about this later, that it's not an absolute barrier between claims of business creditors against your personal assets, but it does make it more difficult for those claims to be asserted. And so they're essentially, these are the four most common. There are a few others, but these are the ones that you're most likely to see. And one is called a C corporation, one is called an S corporation. Those refer to provisions of the Internal Revenue Code that apply to those particular structures, and we'll talk about that in a minute.
Right.
An LLC is a limited liability company, which is in Massachusetts a relatively new method of organizing a business.
1997 or so.
Right,
in that ballpark.
in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
And then there's the limited liability partnership, which of the four is probably the least common.
That's for professional practices
Law
like
firms,
legal and accounting, right?
Accounting firms,
Yeah.
correct.
Good. And also we have to mention right away on our content, Gene, is that there are such so-called unlimited liability entities that you've pointed out, such as sole proprietor general partnership. Could you let's talk about that
Sure.
too.
A sole proprietorship is essentially somebody who starts a business, doesn't choose to incorporate or set up one of the other limited liability entities. And the disadvantage there is that if there's a claim asserted against the business, if you own a restaurant and somebody gets ill or something of that nature, they may well go after your house. General partnership is similar to a sole proprietorship, but it means there's more than one person involved. So if two people are in business together, even if they don't think of themselves as partners, they may well be considered, if the world thinks you are a partnership, you are a partnership.
Right.
And not only, with a partnership, not only do you have the disadvantage of a claim being able to be asserted against your personal assets, but a partner has the ability to bind the rest of the partners. So if Cliff and I are in a partnership together, and I decide we need to spend $150,000 on new computer equipment, and I sign the purchase order, then Cliff's liable for that $150,000, whether he agrees with me or not.
Right.
And so, as a general proposition, these are less favored than,
Yeah.
There are
They're risky.
circumstances where it makes sense,
Yeah.
but if somebody's starting a business or thinking about a business, one of my starting points is take a look at the limited liability option.
Right.
The thing about, I want to talk to you about the partnership thing. I mean, I've been there, done that, and not a pleasant story. So I'm not going to tell it.
Can be ugly.
But I have a thing about advising people not to get involved in a partnership, either just falling into one, as you mentioned. You just start operating. Hey, Cliff, we're gonna fix mufflers.
Right.
And, we have an implied partnership, right?
Right.
But the thing about it, you have it's a 50-50 deal. You have an ongoing business. It's a partnership. You can't make a move without the other guy, for one thing, legally. I mean, it's a 50-50.
Well, no, you can. That's the problem.
That is the problem, yeah.
The problem is you can make a move,
Yeah.
and then you bind the other guy,
Yeah.
whether or not he knows about it or agrees.
If you and I are partners, as I understand it, and you go out and you spend 150 grand on something, and on credit,
Right.
even, on our partnership, on our company, not a corporation, and I've got the deep pocket and you don't, and things go bad, they're coming after me. Whether I
Absolutely.
signed it or no, we're partners, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's really that's one of the significant
That's the bad
aspects.
part, yeah.
There's another type of partnership that I don't want to get into because it's not as common, but there's also a limited partnership you can set up. But
Yeah.
I'm not going to include that in today's
Yeah.
discussion.
It's
Okay.
not, yeah, it's not
It's not common enough.
common, the others will
And
talk.
if there is a partnership and you cease doing business, you have to liquidate the business entity. I mean, you can't just. That's one thing about a partnership is you want to.
Well, that's-
one person wants to get out. You have to cancel the whole.
Well, and that's right. One of the things about if you set up a limited liability entity, one way to think about it is you think about it as if you're setting up a separate person.
Right.
And that one of the advantages of a limited liability entity is longevity. It can live longer than the founders.
Right.
And it makes it easier to transfer the interests in the business. The business can continue if one or more of the individuals who's involved chooses to retire
Yeah,
or
right.
whatever reason doesn't participate in the business anymore.
Right.
It gives you a lot more flexibility on addressing all of those issues.
Okay. Let's then go back to the limited liability concept then, and spend some time on it, Gene. Start with the pros and cons of limited liability entities. Let's take the C-Corp,
Right.
the so-called C-Corp first. Let's talk about that.
Well, a C corporation is a corporation that it's probably the one you're most familiar with.
Yeah.
Most large corporations are C corporations.
New
It
York
refers-
Stock Exchange, all C-Corps, yeah.
Those are all C corps.
Yeah.
And it refers to subchapter C of the Internal Revenue
Right.
Code. One of the advantages of a C corporation is that it's the one that investors are most comfortable with. So if part of your business plan is I'm going to raise money from angel investors or venture capital firms, then you want to be looking at a C corporation. Now, there are some disadvantages to a C corporation, one of which, the most prominent of which, is you get what is referred to as double taxation.
Right.
And by that I mean the C corporation pays tax on its income, and then it distributes dividends to the investors, the shareholders, and they pay taxes as well.
Right.
Now, there's strategies to minimize the impact of that,
Yeah.
but those are some of the issues that you think about when you're thinking about a C corporation.
Right. And if you have over, 100 stockholders?
That's an S corporation.
Under 100 is an S. Over 100,
Yeah,
it's got to
there's-
be a C.
The C corporation, you can have a very large number of investors, shareholders, There's no limits on the number
It
of
doesn't have to
shareholders.
be a person either, right? It could be
Exactly. That's
another
right.
entity. Harvard Business School could
Right.
invest, yeah, right.
Exactly.
That's C corporation. I come to you on forming a C corporation. That doesn't have to be in any particular state. I mean, I could be doing business in the state of New York, but the C corporation is set up in California theoretically. I mean,
Theoretically, that's true. There are states. There are reasons why you might choose a particular state to incorporate, because one of the things that if you incorporate, say, in Massachusetts, but you're doing business in New York, then you have to register with the regulatory authorities in the state of New York. So you're already paying fees to the Secretary of the Commonwealth for incorporation in
Sure.
Massachusetts. Now you're paying fees in New York. You might be paying in
All
whatever
of those
state.
states, yeah.
So one of the considerations that drives where do you incorporate is where do you think you're going to be doing business.
Right.
Another consideration is there is a spectrum of business friendliness, if you will, among the regulations of the various states. Delaware is perceived as being the most business friendly. So many investors, many venture capital firms, many angel investors will require that you incorporate in Delaware prior, and then you can register as a foreign corporation in Massachusetts.
Right, or any state you're
Right.
going to do business in. right,
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
But Delaware
Is
is
Nevada-
always considered friendly, but it's because the state of Delaware has its regulations on corporations, C corporations,
any corporation.
S-Corp
any
too.
any
yeah.
corporation.
Yeah.
And that state, in its own magnanimous attitude, has very flexible rules and regulations that are considered friendly
Correct.
to business.
Now, having said that, Massachusetts significantly revised its own corporation laws relatively recently to make it more business friendly, because essentially they were losing business to
To Delaware, Nevada, I think, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Nevada is another state that's
Yep.
considered business
Right.
friendly.
Right.
Right.
So let's turn from the C Corp, that's an option. We can turn to the pros and cons. This is another limited liability idea called the S-Corp.
Right.
Gene, what's the deal on that?
So if you recall, the S refers to subchapter S of the Internal Revenue Code.
Tax, yeah.
But as if you remember, we talked about with a C Corp double taxation.
Right.
An S Corp is what's known as a pass-through entity. And what that means is that the losses and profits get passed directly to the investor. So there's only one level of taxation. This can have, not only is that an advantage generally, one level of taxation as compared to two, but if you're starting a business and you have income, let's say you've got a day job and the business is something you're doing on the side, most new businesses run up losses.
Right.
If the profits and losses are going directly to your tax return as an individual, you can use those losses from your business to offset other income and revenue. So there's real tax advantages to a subchapter S corporation.
Right.
There are restrictions, and those are significant. One is that you can't have more than 100 investors, as
Right.
Cliff alluded to just
It
recently.
was 70 up until what?
75, yeah.
75 for 5 years.
But
right.
another significant one is everybody has to be a person, a human being, and not in the Mitt Romney sense that all corporations are
Right.
persons, but living, breathing human beings.
Social Security
That-
number.
They have to be U.S. citizens or with appropriate residency.
Right.
And so this became an issue. I had a group of people that were starting a business, and one of the principals of the business was going to be a Swiss national, was a Swiss national. We couldn't do a C Corp.
Right.
S-Corp. rather,
S-Corp, yeah.
Because he
He
didn't
didn't-
qualify.
he didn't- yeah.
Also, because of the rule that they have to be persons, a lot of investment comes in the form of venture capital firms, which are partnerships or limited liability companies. Those are prohibited from investing in a subchapter S.
Right.
So if your strategy is to go out and seek that type of investment, you don't want to start with a subchapter S.
You can't. Well, if
No,
you do, you
well,
can
you
change
have-
it at
you
least.
can
You gotta
convert it,
change it,
but
right, yeah. Because
you
it
may-
has to be a human being.
Right. But
That's one of the reasons, back when you were talking about C-Corp, you said you may end up there anyway, you know, in a C-Corp. If you had the brilliant concept of starting as an S-Corporation, you might end up as a C-Corp anyway.
you might end there because you choose to, because somebody comes along and says, I want to invest, but I'm not the appropriate type of investor. I'm a hedge fund or something
Yep.
else, a venture capital
Right.
firm. Or
Private equity,
there are rules that govern S-Corps. For example, you have to make an election within 9 months of the date of incorporation. If you fail to do that, you're by default a C-Corp, so you might end up there anyway, even if you
Right.
didn't originally intend to be.
right. So you form a corporation, within 9 months, you have to elect for the IRS and S,
exactly. You file
subchapter S, and then it's got to be a human being
Right.
that is a
You've got to comply with all
stockholder.
the other rules,
Right.
but you also have to file that election. If you fail to file the election,
It's C-Corp
you're going to
automatic.
be a C-Corp.
Right. Was it 9 months?
By the way, it just occurred to me, though, in you looking at your all the work that you've done. Look at your portfolio of work that you've done. If I was analyzing that right now, would you, of all the small businesses that you've worked with, have you put the majority into S-Corp or C-Corp or LLC, or can you make that kind of statement?
Well, most businesses start. It really depends. I mean, there's not a. I've done a lot of all of them because a lot depends on what the what the goals of the business are. I've done pretty much. I haven't done a lot of limited liability partnerships,
Right.
but I've done a lot of LLCs, a lot of S-Corps, and a lot of C-Corps.
Let's move on. Speaking of the LLC, let's move on. That's limited liability also.
That's correct.
On your list, there are pros and cons. Let's hit that a little bit. The LLC concept.
Okay, so the LLC, limited liability company, for an LLC, pass-through treatment is available.
Right.
So that's a plus, so that you can get the one level of taxation. A second advantage of the LLC as compared to, say, either a S or a C corporation is essentially with corporations, profits are divided on a pro rata basis based on the number of shares. There's some variations on that, but that's
Primarily
that's the bottom.
share stockholders, right?
Right.
Yeah.
LLC gives you more flexibility.
Right.
And that can sometimes be a good news and a bad news situation. There, not complete flexibility. The IRS still requires for an ownership interest, you have to make some sort of contribution to the business.
Right.
But you have more flexibility in how you can acknowledge those contributions and work with them. And I say it's good news and bad news in the sense that if you've got something that's not quite as traditional, then an LLC might work very well for you. On the other hand, I have a vivid recollection of years ago, I was going to participate in an LLC with a bunch of people, and we were going to be a software company, and I was going to my contribution was the legal work. And the problem was, because there's so much flexibility, we spent probably 7 or 8 Saturdays at my office in the conference room going over how we were going to allocate these interests.
Allocate, yeah.
And we never quite came to an agreement.
Yeah.
And it was probably a good thing then that we never went through with the business.
I mean,
because-
did anybody pull out a weapon at the time, or was
No.
it
So-
strictly verbal?
Strictly very.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that you need to be aware of.
Right.
The downsides are there's a self-employment tax on your profits.
Right.
And the conventional wisdom is that investors are wary of limited liability companies.
Yep.
Now, having said that, I had a client that started an LLC not too long ago, and he had been working with the MIT Entrepreneurs Forum, and they're gung-ho on investors and LLCs.
LLCs.
So a lot would depend on, I mean, the conventional wisdom is if you're looking for venture or angel funding, you want to go with a C corporation.
Right.
But there is a different school of thought that says an LLC is just fine. It's
If
gonna-
in the beginning you get all of the agreements written
Right.
up properly. So
Exactly.
as I understand, the LLC just gives you so much flexibility for its members, not stockholders. As we know, they're
Right.
not stockholders.
That's correct.
But it gives you, not unlimited, but certainly a wide choice of exactly how you divvy up the money, the profits, who does what,
Exactly.
what's your involvement. Whereas the corporate structure, whether it's S or C, is pretty rigid.
That, relatively speaking, that's
Right.
true. So
Yeah.
an LLC might be advantageous, for example, if you've got people who are making different kinds of contributions. Somebody's going to be putting in a lot of time, somebody's going to be putting in intellectual
money.
property, somebody's going to be putting in money. Then it gives you more flexibility as to
Right.
how you can structure the ownership, interests, and return on investment.
Exactly. Whereas the S-Corp and the C-Corp is pretty rigid along the lines of percentage of stock that's owned. So if it's an S-Corp and we own a third each and the company shows a profit of 150 grand, we each get a Schedule K of 50 grand goes on a
Exactly.
personal tax return. But if it's an LLC and all I'm doing is providing some advice, I may only get 10%.
We can,
of
yeah,
that.
you have more
We can be
flexibility.
agreed to up front so that it's a much more flexible thing, yeah. Now, LLC is more money for the state, right? Isn't it $400 or $500 a year?
It actually is a wash. When you think about, the LLC is more expensive
For the
to-
state, yeah.
to start, and the annual fees for
Fee.
annual reports are more expensive. However,
Yeah.
there's an excise tax on corporations that doesn't exist for LLCs, and
So it's almost a wash.
it's, as far as I'm concerned, I would not let that factor drive the decision making.
Okay, all right. Yeah, because it's $100 to file your papers for a corporate structure, but because of the excise tax, I think it's the $400 or whatever it is for the LLC, it is a wash.
Right.
Gene, there's another one here on your list, the limited liability entities called the B-Corp.
Right.
New kid on the block, huh?
Give us a story on that one.
Okay. So, in recent years, there's been a movement to say that corporations should consider other values than just increasing value to the shareholders.
Corporate social responsibility, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so you've got companies like Ben & Jerry's or companies like REI that want to do good
Good
as
work.
well as do well.
Right.
And so a B corporation explicitly allows a corporation to take those social values into its decision-making process. In Massachusetts, the B Corp is very new, and that's part of it's still a little unsettled about how things are going to work.
The ink isn't quite dry, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And particularly, one of the issues that we got to really see how it plays out is if you're going to incorporate those other social values into your business model, third parties and your shareholders can look at you and try and make a evaluation of how well you're living up to those values. And it's not quite clear how that process is going to work
Right.
yet. So it can, if you're somebody who wants the limited liability, but you want to be
For profit.
as
Not-
compared to a nonprofit,
Right.
a B Corp might well be something you want to look
Right.
at.
Now, how, in the beginning, is it put into the corporate record papers or whatever and filed with the state what good works you plan to do?
That's how I would do
Right,
it. Yes.
okay, yeah.
Excuse me. Gene, another important point that you made is putting the world on notice using what you call appropriate designation. Could you tell us about that?
Sure. The principle is, if you remember, I said a limited liability entity was a firewall because it can be breached.
Yeah,
One of the ways it can be breached is if you don't put the world on notice that they're dealing with a limited liability entity.
comma, INC, or,
Yeah. So when you set up in your business name, you would say Cliff Robbins Inc. or
Right.
Cliff Robbins LLC.
LLC.
And you put it as it is indicated everywhere. Your
Right.
checks, your
Business
website.
card, checks, name, URL.
I had a situation a few years ago where a company was building its corporate headquarters. And they put up a big sign and it said future home of X. And it didn't say X Inc.
Incorporated, yeah.
As it happened, they were in a contract dispute with one of their contractors. That person went into court, told the judge they're not a corporation, and got a lien on the owner's house. The lien was applied the week before the owner was scheduled to close on the sale of the house, which raised everybody's blood pressure considerably.
Oh, yeah.
Now we were able to get that knocked out
Yeah,
very quickly,
yeah.
but
You didn't own the house yet.
it would have been a lot cheaper to put the word Inc. on that sign than to pay me to spend a day in court.
Yeah, probably 30 cents worth of ink, right? Or paint, right?
You also advise your clients to follow the formalities like the annual meeting minutes, bylaws, and so forth.
That's correct, because this is another way that you can lose your limited liability
You
protection.
penetrate that shield.
If you
right?
don't, if you're not holding annual meetings, and they don't have to be enormously elaborate, particularly if you've only got, 2 shareholders, you can have a
Or if
very,
you're the only shareholder,
Yeah.
right?
keep minutes, adopt bylaws, follow the bylaws. That can get you into trouble,
Yep.
particularly if you have a shareholder who's not happy with a business decision,
Even if you
and
own
you
one
haven't
share.
followed you haven't followed the bylaws. That gives them a way to legally challenge the business decision, which you don't want to have happen.
Of course, yep. How about, just to go back 1 second, was something that did pop into my mind as a question I don't know the answer to, which is a lot of things. My URL, my www.cliffrobbins.com, let's say, if I'm a corporation, do I need to put cliffrobinsinc.com?
In the URL, no.
Okay.
No. And you can have, for example, if you wanted to just have the website be Cliff Robbins, and that's the brand.
Yeah.
Because the brand is different than the
legal name.
The legal entity. But you want to have on the website somewhere,
Cliffrobbins,
cliffrobbins.com
Inc.
is owned by Cliff Robbins, Inc.
Right,
And, if you have a website, you want to have terms of use, and you put it in there, you put it in a number. It doesn't have to be everywhere, but it has to be prominent enough that somebody can see it.
okay.
Thank you very much for watching the Fox Robbins Business Show. Great to have you on board. We have actually 2 more episodes with Gene Curry, so we want you to watch those and encourage you to watch those also because they're all good content. And again, if you want to send us your comments, please send comments to foxrobbins@gmail.com, and we will see you guys next time. Thank you.